we can support, one or two people for a given Medicare advisor to we can support 10,000 people or 100,000 people or 1 million people with a given Medicare advisor if you have the right tools and the right technology.
Welcome to the 5-Year Frontier podcast, a preview of the future through the eyes of the innovators shaping our world. Through short, insight-packed discussions, I seek to bring you a glimpse of what a key industry could look like 5 years out. I'm your host, Daniel Darling, a venture capitalist at Focal, where I spend my days with founders at the very start of their journey to transform an industry. The best have a distinct vision of what's to come, a guiding North Star they're building towards, and that's what I'm here to share with you. Today's episode is about the future of the US healthcare system. In it, we cover the mission for radical transparency, challenging entrenched insurance providers, personalized healthcare, and AI's empowerment of patient choice. Our guide will be Cobi Gantz, CEO of Chapter, a company revolutionizing how Americans navigate the complexities of Medicare and optimize their healthcare coverage. Founded in 2020, Chapter has rapidly become a leader in providing personalized, technology-driven Medicare guidance, aiming to simplify decision-making for seniors across the nation. They have taken on the enormous task of bringing greater transparency to the complex, multi-layered, multi-incentive US healthcare system for the benefit of consumers. The company has raised over $100 million in funding from investors such as XYZ Venture Capital, SUSE, and Maverick. Before founding Chapter, Cobi spent 6 years at Palantir, a $230 billion big data analytics and AI company embedded into the public and government sector. Cobi holds degrees from the University of Pennsylvania, an economics degree from Wharton, and a public policy from Cambridge.
Cobi, so nice to see you. Thanks for coming on to talk with me.
Thanks for having me.
We're talking about the US healthcare system, which is obviously enormous, but it's also really messy, with many areas needing attention and improvement. So why did you choose to focus on Medicare?
I actually didn't start the company intending to build in Medicare. I kind of accidentally wound up building in this area. Initially, I wanted to help my parents and my grandfather deal with their retirement journey. It just became apparent that one of the top, if not the top challenge that everyone was facing was Medicare. How do I sign up for Medicare? How can I afford it? What do I do with it? Is it the right coverage for me? So I wanted to build a system and a product that allows people to navigate that complexity with ease and with financial security.
Simplifying that journey and giving a lot of optionality is incredibly valuable, but also undertaking that as an entrepreneur, you're faced with an immense amount of regulation, red tape. You might have your own innovation in mind around how you want to adapt that industry, but you might not be able to do that because of external factors. So we're not put off by a lot of the regulatory environment that you are now entering into.
Before Chapter, I was at Palantir for almost 7 years, building in the US government space. So pretty familiar with dealing with bureaucracy, red tape, a lot of compliance and regulatory constraints. So that part didn't scare me too much, but there are a lot of really just absurd rules in Medicare that are actually very counter to consumer benefit. One example is it is actually illegal for me to just put Medicare plan data up on the internet. It has to be approved by the government and by insurance carriers who are disincentivized to have price transparency because they don't want you to compare insurance carriers. They want you to sign up for theirs. So the regulations here are really funny because it's illegal for me to put it up online, but it's not illegal for me to say it to someone over the phone. So it's one of these things where it's just stuck in the Stone Age. So there are a lot of really bad regulations. There's some good regulations too, but a lot of bad policies that we are writing a lot about and trying to help educate both consumers and the government about how they could potentially make it better.
And are you seeing the Medicare industry go through now some change, or what are you seeing as the evolution of this industry?
Some of the evolution is just natural evolution that happens, better technology, people being more educated about their options. But I think the broad evolutionary direction is consumer friendly, not trying to favor insurance carriers, and really trying to help consumers for the first time. Because in the past, really the insurance carrier or the healthcare provider has been viewed as the end user or the customer, where, in my opinion, the citizen, the consumer, should be the end customer.
And what are some of those regulatory changes that you think could have the biggest impacts, and how would they sort of play out over the coming years?
One that I think would be really valuable at a high level, CMS doesn't directly regulate Medicare brokers today. CMS regulates insurance carriers who regulate Medicare brokers. And so there's this chain of regulatory responsibility that puts, in my opinion, too much power in the hands of insurance carriers. Ironically, I think if CMS directly regulated Medicare brokers, it would be better than having insurance carriers regulate Medicare brokers. So that's one. There's a bunch of rules as well on data transparency and data sharing that have come into effect. The IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act from a few years ago, was passed and it actually requires insurance carriers to publish their provider network data. So who's in network with which doctors are in network with which plans, which is a pretty obvious and basic data point that you'd expect. But then there's pushback from the industry. Last year, there was a big lawsuit, or the government tried to push through some different incentive programs, and the Medicare brokerage industry actually sued, and it went up to the Texas State Supreme Court, and the court issued a stay on it. And so there's a lot of really interesting legal challenges going on right now in the space as well, and we'll see what happens with those.
A lot of vested interests and incumbents there that you have to deal with. If you could make one big sweeping change, if you had that magic wand to drive a really big impact to the Medicare industry for the benefit of the retiring population, what would you be doing?
Oh, great question. I would probably change what it means to be a licensed Medicare agent. I would make it a fiduciary obligation. So the Medicare agent is required to be a fiduciary to the consumer. Today, by law, the Medicare agent is required to treat the insurance carrier as their customer. So when a consumer goes and talks to a Medicare agent, they are forced to sign contracts that say they will only sell policies with which they are contracted and that pay them money. And insurance carriers pay more when insurance brokers drive more volume. And it's like wildly ridiculous and unethical. That's how the industry works. And so our model mitigates that, and we align incentives all the way through, but we're the only insurance Medicare broker or Medicare advisor that does that. Most Americans who don't work with Chapter are getting the short end of the stick there. So I think roughly half of Americans rely on a Medicare broker to sign up for Medicare. So I think that would directly impact 35 to 40 million Americans in a day.
And that sounds like a massive misalignment of incentives at the detriment for these consumers. Maybe you can share a little bit about how you adjust that at Chapter and how you align.
This is one of the fundamental innovations that we've created and that we saw when we built the company. We're like, this is crazy. There's no way this is how Medicare organizations should operate at a high level. So Chapter as a company does earn commissions like other brokers, but that is entirely separated and blinded from our Medicare advisors. So we employ full-time Medicare advisors. They have access to 100% of Medicare plans because we've done a lot of data and technology work to integrate all that data and model it and built a recommendation engine that recommends the right plan for each person. That system has no concept of are we paid, how much are we paid, etc. So it's just what plan is right for each person. And then our Medicare advisors get paid the same, not only regardless of what type of plan someone gets enrolled in, but even when Chapter earns no money. Let's say Plan X, this small plan in Florida or whatever, is the best plan for a user. We will still enroll them in that plan, even though that plan doesn't pay Chapter. And we are the only people who do that. So that's one of the big aspects of it. The other really pernicious part of the market is most Medicare brokers will tell you they're independent, or they'll say they look at their plan agnostic, but they're not. They're just it's just a blatant lie. It's amazing. They're independent in that they work with more than one plan, but usually they work with 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. There are 175 or 200 plans out there. It's kind of wild to say that, oh yeah, I work with a few, and so that's all you need. It's just ridiculous. There's a lot of technical and operational complexity to doing what we do. So and it's expensive. So I understand why people don't do it from that perspective, but the only way to give good advice and to make sure seniors get the health insurance they deserve is to look at every option and make sure that people are getting the right plan for their needs.
It sounds like you're really taking a matching and data first and potentially algorithmic first approach to saying, well, how do we do an unbiased matching or observation around what is the right plan for that consumer, and then start to loop in the human on top of that versus having a human that maybe has a misaligned incentive just to push 1 or 2 or 3 plans on top of that. Is that directionally where you think a lot of this will be going, where you will rely more on algorithms and AI to be providing that unbiased opinion?
I think that there's 2 separate challenges. There's what is the right plan match, and then there's educating people on their trade-offs. I think on what is the right plan match, yes, data, technology, recommendation engines can do a lot of work and can be pretty close to correct. Then there's humans who aren't always rational and aren't always making rational decisions, they might have a preference for one insurance carrier because they're aware of it. Like they might say, oh, I've been on United Healthcare for my employer for 20 years, so I'm going to stay on United Healthcare, even though like that makes no sense, but rationally, but it's what people are comfortable with. So there's always that element of it, and helping people understand the trade-offs. Because it's not always an easy decision. Some plans might have similar provider networks. One plan will have a better dental benefit. One plan will have a better vision benefit. So how do you make those trade-offs? That I think is very hard for a machine to do for a while. But on the former, what is the right plan? What are those trade-offs? Helping people have access to the data, I think is largely, robots can do that pretty well.
Well said. And you're also serving the elder population, or, this baby boomer and retiring population, what's called this growing silver tsunami that is occurring. And often they're feeling sidelined a little bit by technology, or that it's not really serving them as they would like. How are you adapting or evolving Chapter to be able to take sort of this advanced recommendation engines and technology first approach, but serve a customer segment that is potentially less of an early adopter of technology?
At this point, people who are in their 60s and early 70s are quite adept at using phones, using the web. They tend to have slightly different behavior. They tend to transact less via mobile devices, specifically relative to what a 30-year-old or 20-year-old might do on a mobile device. But they are on their mobile devices by and large as much, if not more, than a teen or a 20-year-old. So it's almost less a technology issue today and we do have to build technology differently. Like the user interface has to be a little different. The way we build is a little different. The design is a little different, but that's solvable. I think Medicare and health insurance in general is so complicated that anyone of any age wants to talk to someone to navigate it, regardless of their tech fluency. And so that's really where it gets to, you kind of want a human to be part of the process. If it were just simply like, oh yeah, let me type in my information, and people just trusted a computer and they just did what the computer said, yeah, that we could do without humans for sure. But it's that trust and that education that is really hard to automate away. And that's where I think humans are insanely valuable and where humans should be spending their time.
Do you see things like autonomous agents and sort of agents that you can interact with just via voice over the phone instead of interact with a human as being something that maybe they'll be adopted by the likes of Chapter and received well by your aging population? Or do you think that there'll be natural pushback and bias against it?
A lot of companies are trying this in the Medicare space. We've experimented with it. I think the technology is a little premature still to use in a real way. You can certainly use it for data collection. You can certainly use it to take small amounts of data and do small parameter voice AI agents. But if you think about what voice agents are good at, it's reserving a table at a restaurant. What do you need to know for that? You need to know the number of people in the party. You need to know the time. Maybe you need to know the type of table. I don't know. There's 2 or 3 parameters, right? For Medicare, you're talking about 100 plus parameters, maybe 200 parameters. And not only that, people don't know what the definition of a party size is. Like in Medicare, people don't know what the definition of a copay versus a coinsurance is, or a deductible versus an initial coverage limit. If you don't even know what the parameters are, it's very hard to have a robot explain them. That's where I think voice AI and AI in general has a pretty long way to go to replacing humans. But I do think there's a lot where it can augment, can be a co-pilot. That's really what we're focused on, a lot of that. How do we surface information very quickly to our Medicare advisors to empower the human rather than to take the human out of the loop, which in N years may be possible, at least for a subsegment of the population. But I think we're pretty far from that today.
We are talking about the future here on this podcast and that kind of 5-year frontier. So if you do fast forward the rate of technology innovation and change, how do you see the future of the US healthcare industry and Medicare within that 5-year time horizon?
A lot will depend on what this administration decides to do. Some of that might look like more value-based care, which is more at-risk relationships between insurance carriers, health systems, and consumers and patients. And some of it, I think, might just be a result of better data sharing and better data transparency so that it's easier to know who is actually using what benefits, how should people consume different healthcare, where should they consume it. There's no reason that you go to one doctor on this street and an MRI is X dollars, and you go to a doctor on the next street over and the MRI is 3X that. A lot of those problems I think will get better. What I think the government will have to step in and help with is the high level incentive alignment and making sure that the value-based arrangements or the fee-for-service arrangements, either way, are serving patients' best interest, because that is largely not happening today.
There's a lot of talk around the value that could be unlocked within all the data, whether it's a patient's electronic medical records, all the history around their medical behaviors and treatments. What do you think will start to happen if that data starts to become easily transportable and accessible to all kinds of parties?
There's nothing stopping me as a patient from pulling my data from a bunch of different systems and uploading it into another system. I can do that today. It's just work. And so like that means that it's going to have a lower end of people who do it. And then maybe it's harder to get as much data as you need. But I think that will naturally become better and better. And more people are also just interested in like biohacking and measuring themselves. And so I think that movement will organically move it in that direction as well. It'd be great to have a much higher compliance rate, much more data. That's not like it's impossible or illegal or you can't do it. It's just, it's annoying. So that's where I think it's like not the driving force. I think a lot of the algorithms, a lot of the LLMs are becoming very helpful to consumers and will become more and more helpful and will help with predictive medicine for sure.
Do you foresee that there's just a natural triaging or sort of, pocket doctor that is able to guide people on their kind of medical journey that is powered on this data and powered with LLMs?
Yeah, I think so. And there are already a bunch of companies that are doing that or trying to do it. I think it comes back to trust. Like in the same way that, yeah, I could tell you with pretty high confidence without talking to you what Medicare plan you should be on if you give me the appropriate data. You're still not going to just take my recommendation and sign up for that plan because it's a high consequence decision. In the same way that like if I have an app that says, hey, I have this issue, I'm probably not just going to like go take a prescription for that issue. I'm probably still going to want to go see a doctor today. Now, maybe that culture changes over 2, 3, 4, 5 years, maybe 10 years. But at least today, I personally wouldn't trust an app that doesn't have a doctor on the other side. I wouldn't trust a machine to tell me what prescriptions to take without having a human review it. Maybe you would. I don't know.
So maybe a trust but verify approach. And there's probably a sliding scale on what you're trusting a computer recommendation versus a doctor.
If a computer recommendation says, hey, go take this homeopathic remedy, has no side effects, or go take some Advil, I'd trust that. But hey, go take an antibiotic or go take a thing that, could have addictive side effects, like absolutely not.
What's your hopes for more predictive and personalized medicine? Where do you start to see the pointy end of that innovation going?
So this is another area where I think the government can help a lot. Like the way that the FDA requires companies to go through the many, many steps of clinical trials is a massive block to innovation and a massive slowdown of new drug development. We want to be responsible. We obviously want drugs to be tested appropriately, but there's so much waste and delay that happens today. So much so that like there's an island off the coast of, I think it's Honduras, that is basically set up to not have US jurisdiction and companies are going to test drugs there.
On humans.
Yeah, because it has its own jurisdiction. They're not subject to FDA jurisdiction, so they can do what they want. Probably not the right answer, right? Because I do think some oversight is good and appropriate and important, but the way that it works today is just so suboptimal that we are probably slowing down innovation by decades.
And so how do you disrupt that using more of a data approach, or are you thinking maybe it's more, in silico sort of simulated clinical trials, or where does your mind go with that?
It's all of the above. It's from the most like minute, boring, tedious things of like, how do you make the forms that a company has to submit to the FDA not take weeks to put together or months to put together, to how can the FDA process these things faster, which is just a lot of like internal apps, internal ops, internal like automations. Forget about all the science. Like that alone would dramatically improve speed and innovation. But then, yes, there's all the more like substantive, much better computer models, much better simulations for drug development. That I don't think the government is blocking. I think it's just like natural technology evolution. It's just like the technology is getting better and better and will continue to get there, and hopefully a lot better as we make some of the advances the next few years.
Focusing back on your aging population that you serve, a lot of it is around how they're being served increasingly in-home or with preventative care. How is that changing and reshaping healthcare delivery as more of it happens outside of the medical practice or the hospital?
I think it's a great positive trend. To be able to receive care outside of a facility is wonderful. It's good for the patient. In many ways, it lowers costs, especially if you do it preventatively. So I think it's a really strong trend. I think the challenge right now, part of it is data. Like it's really hard to know what people are actually doing at home outside of facilities. Like compliance is bad, monitoring is bad. Even if you use remote monitoring, compliance is broadly not that great. I think a lot of it comes back to culture. Are people willing to wear these devices? Are people willing to like be observed? A lot of people have very kind of real privacy concerns, maybe real, maybe not. That I think is more of a block than the actual technology. I'm sure like if we had a mobile MRI that you could just rent or use at your home, yeah, that'd be awesome. And that's like a technology issue. But most of it is like, how do you get people to do what they need to do or tell you when they need your help? And that is largely a culture and an education challenge.
I'd love to get your take from where you sit on longevity and sort of what your hope is for some of the science that's coming out there. And are you seeing the industry kind of reshape a little bit of itself in preparation from more controls and more sort of demand for fighting aging?
Broadly, I think longevity as a movement is becoming very in vogue for good reason. Again, insurance carriers, the system isn't set up to help with this because you have employers choosing health insurance divorced from what a patient wants in commercial health insurance. And then you have individuals choosing Medicare, which might be from a different insurance carrier at that moment in life. And so it's very hard for an insurance carrier to have longitudinal access to a patient or like the ability to track outcomes over time or to risk adjust early to see what happens later. One really interesting thing is, could the government basically subsidize or create incentives for people to stay on a single insurance carrier for a much longer time so that they could get this longitudinal data, much more longevity focused interventions, and then insurance carriers could get the benefit of it. Today, maybe you sign up for United when you're 25. United invests a lot in you to make you healthy, keep you healthy. And then when you're 50, you sign up for Cigna. And then United's like, wait, I just invested a ton of money in you and I'm not getting your premiums anymore. Like that's a lot of the issue today with the longitudinal and longevity components that I think the government will probably have to do something if they want to make massive scale improvements on the insurance carrier side.
What other parts of the overall healthcare system are you excited about in terms of the innovations that may be coming over the course of the next 5 years?
One area of prescription drug coverage, which sounds kind of boring, but it's really important. It's one of the highest expense categories for people of like prescriptions matter a lot and people spend a lot of money on their prescriptions. A lot of it is tangled up in how PBMs operate and how they control the market, but bringing prescription prices down and giving people the ability to look at what is the best option for them. So one thing we do at Chapter is we will look at not only should you get your prescription through your Medicare plan, and where should you fill it? Because if you fill it at CVS versus Rite Aid, it might actually have a different price. But should you instead use Cost Plus or GoodRx or another program outside of your insurance? Because it might actually be cheaper in some cases, not even using your insurance. And so broadly, that goes back to the price transparency across the board theme. That is becoming more doable as more pressure for open APIs and open data has become available. And I think that's actually has a massive impact and can have a massive impact on what people pay and how much things cost. So that's one area. I think another area is around, as you alluded to earlier, just the ability for drugs to be developed faster because of the ability to simulate organisms much better. So that is becoming pretty interesting.
Super exciting.
Yeah. And a lot of the science there is moving very quickly. As more people have better information sharing across countries as well, you'll see some therapies and therapeutics coming out of other countries that are then now more accessible around the world because of the ability for this information to travel more easily. And that is also advancing research and advancing developments faster than before.
I'd love to just end on some time around how you spent time at Palantir. Obviously, there was a huge amount of innovation going on internally on the operational side. An outfit like Palantir, how have you looked at building Chapter from an operational standpoint, from a business standpoint, to take advantage of some of these massive step changes in efficiency and gains thanks to this technology trend that we're on?
It's going to sound so simple and so basic, but hiring good people and keeping a really high talent bar is just the most important thing that cascades to everything. Like if you hire the wrong people or people who aren't quite good enough, that will slow you down. It will mean they do things poorly. It will blow up the company. And so that's just like the most foundational thing. And then how do you actually hire and interview well? That I think Palantir, I got a lot of experience and practice doing that at Palantir. So that I think has been a wonderful lesson that I've brought to Chapter. On the operational side, like at Palantir, when I started there, it took us maybe 7 or 8 people forward deployed engineers to stand up one instance of Palantir at a customer. I was going on site at the US Marines, physically installing servers and trying to keep the stack up and working. And like, it was a Java client that would always shut down and break, and took a lot of humans to make good, and it required really good engineers to make it work. Today, there's a team of, I don't know how many people they are now, probably like 20 or 30 people who collectively manage the entire fleet of Palantir systems from one team of 20. So it's like a 10,000x efficiency improvement. And directionally, that's how I think about, for us, for our Medicare advisors in particular, we have a one-to-one relationship with our Medicare advisors and our members at Chapter. But how can we build the Iron Man suit for our Medicare advisors to be highly efficient and high quality? And we're dramatically improving our efficiency, operational efficiency every year. But I see a pretty similar order of magnitude change that we can have, an improvement we can have of going from you need 10 people to deploy one instance of Palantir to needing 20 people to deploy 10,000 instances of Palantir. Similar here, we can support, one or two people for a given Medicare advisor we can support 10,000 people or 100,000 people or 1 million people with a given Medicare advisor if you have the right tools and the right technology.
Thank you so much. It's been really interesting to see it. I think you bring a really good lens from not just the technology perspective, but also what is actually the reality in the ground in the industry for regulatory and some of that red tape that you have to navigate from there that you're doing very deftly as a founder. So thanks for coming on to chat with us today, Cobi. Really enjoyed what you're up to, and all the best.
Thanks for having me.
US healthcare system is notoriously complex, riddled with misaligned incentives, inefficiencies, and skyrocketing costs. But the next 5 years could be a turning point. As Cobi points out, while technology is advancing at an incredible pace, the real transformation will come when incentives, transparencies, and automation align to put patients first. Imagine a healthcare system where AI-driven insights prevent chronic diseases before they start, where Medicare navigation is seamless and personalized, and where greater data transparency puts control back in the hands of individuals. As automation and AI unlock new efficiencies, the trillion-dollar industry could see waste reduced, outcomes improved, and an aging population better served than ever before. The future of healthcare won't just be about better technology, though. It'll be about breaking down the barriers that have held back innovation. And if we get the right forces aligned, we may finally see a system that delivers not just care, but smarter, more accessible, and more cost-effective healthcare for all. To follow Cobi, head over to his account on X at Cobi Gantz. That's COBIBGANTZ. I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and please subscribe to the podcast to listen to more coming down the pipe. Until next time, thanks for listening. Have a great rest of your day.